Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special Lunch and Learn. My name is Tracy Philippi. I'm the Library Programming and Outreach Specialist for the Village of Cottage Grove. We're so happy to have you at today's Lunch and Learn to explore haunted Wisconsin with our author, Chad Lewis. Those of you on the call notice that I just hit the recording button, so I encourage you to leave your camera off because we will be sharing this for other people to enjoy after the fact. Before I introduce today's sponsor, I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce some upcoming adult programs so that you can put those on your calendar. On November 7th, we'll be joined by author Jim Drager at Grace Coffee to learn about Wisconsin's historic bars and breweries. That's at 6 o'clock. On November 13th, the Dane County Library Service will be joining us virtually at noon to teach us all about Libby. And then on December 11th, Wisconsin's largest indie publisher, Orange Hat Publishing, will be joining us virtually at noon to talk about the publishing industry here in Wisconsin. We were going to hear a quick word from our sponsor, the Friends of the Cottage Grove Library, but I don't think they're on the call right now, so I'd just like to take a minute to thank them. They sponsor all of our virtual programs. Thank you to the Friends of the Cottage Grove Library. You can find out more about their work by visiting their Facebook page. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. Chad Lewis is a researcher, author, and lecturer on topics of the strange and unusual. His background is in the field of psychology, and he completed his bachelor and master degree work in that field. But for nearly 30 years, he has traveled the globe in search of the unique and bizarre stories and history. So with that, take it away, Chad.
Well, hello and welcome, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the library and the staff for having me here today.
Sorry,
But just as
Chad, I'm really sorry. The Friends of the Cottage Grove Library just entered the waiting room, so I'm just going to give them one quick moment, and then I'm going to pass it back. I'm sorry about that.
The more the merrier.
Yeah. So Nancy is on the call now. Nancy, we'll throw you into the spotlight right away.
Okay, sounds good.
I already mentioned that the Friends of the Cottage Grove Library are the sponsor for all of our virtual programs, and we're so happy to have you here today. So please feel free to share anything about your library advocacy and how people can get involved.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Nancy Engel. I'm the secretary for the Friends group. I've been involved in some way with the Friends for almost 20 years. And so it's a great organization. We love to have volunteers in big ways and in small ways as we champion a library in Cottage Grove. And until we can get a physical building, we love to support the library programming that's going on through Tracy and many other people. So please look for us on Facebook, and you can join as a member and find us in so many different ways. Check out our website to see ways you can get involved as well. As a school librarian in the Madison District, I am definitely a huge fan of libraries and know how important they are to all ages. So hopefully we will continue to work towards getting a physical building in Cottage Grove. But until then, we will continue with these wonderful programs like the Lunch and Learn. And please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you, Tracy, for letting me jump in for a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I know you're in the middle of a busy school day, so we appreciate you hopping on the call and telling us more about the Friends.
All right, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. So we'll pass the mic back to you, Chad.
Great.
Sorry
Again, no problem. Again, thank you all for coming. And those of you who were brave enough to show up to talk about bizarre creatures of Wisconsin and some hauntings throughout our state. My name's Chad Lewis. I'll be your presenter for this program. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So one moment here. Let me just... So all of you should be seeing the Mysterious Creatures of Wisconsin. If you can't see that, let me know. Otherwise, again, as you heard, my name is Chad Lewis, and I'll be your presenter. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, I've spent the last 30 years traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampire legends in Transylvania looking for the Loch Ness Monster, reports of crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really, really weird people. Yeah, well, some scary places, you name it. If it's just bizarre and out there, I've traveled the globe in search of these oddities and mysteries. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore for this program. For the next 45 minutes, you can sit back and relax as we explore some of the weirdest creatures Wisconsin has to offer. I'll give you the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about the directions on how to get there. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you to travel to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not these things exist. So, with that, let's explore some creatures that science says do not exist. Skeptics say they can't exist, yet every year people are coming face to face with these monstrosities. And again, just quick with the village board, you wanted 45, correct? Hope I'm not keeping
That's
too many
great,
people
Chad.
too.
Yep,
Okay,
that's great.
perfect.
And if anybody has any questions, they can ask those at the end too.
Sure. So in the 1800s, Wisconsin was known for one main dreaded and fearsome creature, the hodag out of Rhinelander. And if you've never heard of the hodag, looks like a dragon with its tusks and scales and spine with spikes. Perhaps no one knew more about the hodag than Eugene Shepard out of Rhinelander. He was out in the woods one day when all of a sudden he came across one of these hodags. Much to his credit, he wasn't scared, he was curious. So he went back, gathered some pals, and together they went back and caught one of these hodags in the wild. He ended up putting it on display throughout the Northwoods. At every carnival, county fair, and circus he could, people would pay to go see it. When he was done there, he brought it back to his home in Rhinelander. He had a pit that he held it in. And when the media showed up, they noticed his kids were in the pit maneuvering the levers and pulleys. So they asked him, they said, "Is this hodag a fake, a hoax?" He said, "Of course this one is. The hodag's too dangerous for me to have actually captured one, but I wouldn't be able to. They're too deadly." So, believe it or not, even though this was a hoax, people still to this very day ask me where they can go to see the hodag. And I always tell them, go to Rhinelander. It's everywhere. Statues all through the city. Their sports team mascots are the hodags for their high school. Even their emergency vehicles have the hodag on them. So you can see it all over Rhinelander. But while most people knew the hodag wasn't probably real, in the 1800s, Wisconsin was the hotbed of sea serpent legends through our state. It was said that if you were a resort town during those days and you did not have a sea serpent legend, you were behind the times. You were missing out on tourists coming up from Chicago that wanted to stay at a place that had a sea serpent legend, which is why, as of today, I've collected over 40 different lakes, rivers, and streams that were thought to have had or still have a lake monster in them. One of my favorites is the Mississippi River monster. In the 1800s, people were terrified of the Mississippi River, mainly because they believed there were monsters living in the water. Now, if you believe the newspaper long, covered with a thick scale-like armor that a bullet could not even pierce. Parents refused to allow their children down by the water because they really thought there were man-eating fish in the river. What was happening is men, mostly, probably drunk, were drowning. And when they pulled the bodies out, they found a lot of them had deep scratch marks or claw marks on their calves and ankles, as though something grabbed them and pulled them out to their watery grave. But if you follow the Mississippi River south just a little bit, you'll hit Lake Pepin, a lake on the Mississippi River dividing Wisconsin and Minnesota. They believe something big is living in the lake. The first indigenous peoples would only take their strongest and sturdiest canoes out on the water. When the steamboat captains came up, they too started reporting these giant leviathan of the deep. They started writing about it in their newspapers. Here's one saying it was somewhere between the size of an elephant and a rhinoceros moving through the water. We have newspaper accounts going back to the Civil War talking about a monster in Lake Pepin. Over the decades, so many people spotted it that they dubbed it Pepe, the lake monster of Lake Pepin. Others believe they've captured photographic evidence of this. A few years back, a man was out fishing with his buddy. He told me they saw what appeared to be a log moving upstream against the current. They thought it was odd, so they motored their boat near, and when they got there, they realized it wasn't a log at all. He snapped this photo of what he thinks shows a long-necked, hump-like creature, much like you might consider the Loch Ness Monster. I personally have been on numerous expeditions to Lake Pepin, even lived on a houseboat for many days and nights with noted researcher Noah Voss. As you can see, we had underwater cameras, we had sonar, we had fishing equipment, we had bait, we even jumped in using ourselves as bait. But luckily or unluckily for me, Pepe did not make an appearance. But the best part of this story is that there is a $50,000 reward being offered for the capture of this creature. As of today, nobody has collected this reward. With the weather we're having this week, you could get there, capture Pepe, and be back $50,000 the richer. Or maybe you want to stay a little bit closer to home from where a lot of you are probably watching this from. Just right up the road in Madison is the old Picnic Point, thought to be one of the most romantic places for people to have a kiss at. Many national magazines have dubbed it the place where you would want to go have a romantic kiss. But the older folks that know this place, they don't call it Picnic Point. They call it Witch Point, because the legend is many years ago when the native peoples lived there, some witches started taking children and started consuming them. They had gone to the dark arts, practicing the dark arts. So the townsfolk prayed, the village prayed to the great being, and the great being responded by turning them into trees. And now when you go to Picnic Point, even after all the pioneers settled the area permanently and were farming it, you still can see the trees all about, thought to be the remnants of those witches who consumed all those children who were returned unharmed to Witches Point. I love stories of UFOs, alien abductions, and it should come as no surprise that we have stories of UFOs here in Wisconsin. Because not only do we have the UFO capital of the world here, we have 3 of them. Bellevue, Elmwood, and Dundee all claim to be the UFO capital of the entire world. All 3 of them have UFO Day festivals that you can go and get some alien juice and an alien burger if you want. One of my favorite UFO encounters might be one of the weirdest you will ever hear about. It happened in 1961 in Eagle River, Wisconsin. It happened to this gentleman, Joe Simonton, a plumber and part-time farmer. He was having a late breakfast one morning when all of a sudden he saw a craft that he described looking like this descend into his yard and start hovering in his yard. Simonton had never given much thought to UFOs, so he wasn't frightened. He was curious. So he walked out to this thing. And when he did, an opening appeared on the craft. and out to the front came one of the pilots, the human, the alien, the inhabitant, whatever it was. Simonton could see several other identical beings inside. He said they were all wearing weird clothing. They were all very short, dark hair, dark skin, dark eyed. Simonton said they reminded him of small Italian men walking about. The leader, the presumed leader, had a jug. Simonton realized they wanted water. So he went back to his house, pumped some water for them. When he came back, he saw one of these things was grilling something over a flameless type grill, some food. Trying to get communication going, Simonton motioned like eating. Is that what you're eating? The leader recognized this interest and they ended up trading the water for what the newspapers called alien pancakes from outer space. I told you this was going to be a weird story. Simonton ate one of these pancakes, said it was the worst tasting pancake he'd ever had. Said, no wonder these things are so small. If this is what they're eating, I feel sorry for them. Meanwhile, other people were seeing UFOs in the vicinity of his farm. Once the story broke, in the first week alone, over 1,000 people showed up at his farm looking for those UFO pancakes. Until the day he died, he believed he had encountered something not of this world, something else from somewhere or someplace else. And he's not alone in his sightings of weird things. Today, perhaps the most popular mysterious creature is that of the Bigfoot, known throughout the world by many different names. But here in Wisconsin, we get lots of reports of Bigfoot type creatures. Many of them are your typical Bigfoot sighting, like this one out of Granton by Neilsville, Wisconsin. The year 2000, this gentleman, James Hughes, a farmer and also delivered papers, bundles of the newspaper, was coming home one early morning after dropping off all of the newspapers, when up in front of him, down the road a bit that he traveled thousands of times, at first glance, he thought he saw a bear moving on the side of the road. As he got closer, he slowed down because it was moving toward the road. He didn't want to hit it. By the time he got very close, he realized it wasn't a bear at all. He noticed this thing lumbering across the road. He thought it had to be at least 7 feet tall, covered in a thick, matted down fur. It seemed to be carrying something in his hand. Whether roadkill or a freshly killed prey, he wasn't certain. He almost swerved off the road to miss it as he came to about a complete stop. And the thing just scurried back into the underbrush there and did not reappear. The next day, he finally reported this. He didn't want to report it because he knew how it sounded. But the next day, he made the report. An officer came back with him. They checked the area out for any footprints or scat or any droppings of hair, anything that would point to a Bigfoot creature. They didn't find anything. But after his report came out, Hughes's neighbors came up to him, many of them saying they had seen a similar thing in their neighborhood or in their backyard, but they were too afraid to report it, thinking people would believe they were crazy. A couple days after his sighting, I went there to interview him. I noticed right down the road from his sighting was a farm that had a lot of livestock. So I dropped in and asked them if they were missing any of their livestock, and thankfully they were not. Same thing with Hughes as Mr. Simonton from our previous story, that he believed he had seen some unknown species. Wasn't a misidentification of a bear or a deer or anything else. And that's your traditional Bigfoot or Sasquatch sighting. They normally go something like that. But sometimes in Wisconsin, they get even more bizarre than that. And for that, we traveled to the small town of Steinthal. Now, today, you probably never heard of Steinthal. There's not much there. Back in the 1970s and 80s, this was the paranormal hotspot in Wisconsin, mainly because kids, teenagers and college-age kids believed that this old abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town was haunted. And it was just far enough off the main road to protect them from the prying eyes of law enforcement and their parents. So they would go out there and claim to see weird lights moving around up on the second floor. But when they went in, it was empty. Or they'd hear people walking around talking from inside the home. But when they went in, it was completely empty, save for a creepy doll that somebody put up in the house. As more and more people went there, they started exploring the area around the house because it was surrounded by swampy marshland, which you can kind of make out here from this grainy newspaper photo of the time. That's when people started to see more than a haunted house. They started reporting seeing a Bigfoot-like creature. But this one was a little bit different because this one was said to have glowing green eyes. And when I say eyes, I mean eyes, 3 of them to be exact. They had no idea what to call this thing, so they called it the Steinthal thing. People would gather at the tavern and wait because across the street where my colleague Kevin Nelson is standing right now, that's where the Steinthal thing was spotted. But here's the interesting part is that I've spoken to many of the last remaining residents of Steinthal, and we have no known new cases of it, no new sightings, which begs the question, is it still there? Did it leave to go somewhere else? Was it ever there to begin with? That's where I'll leave it up to you to come to your own conclusion. So if you thought these first stories were weird, and granted they were, these next stories are going to be beyond bizarre. Starting right outside of Seymour near Green Bay is the mysterious Chicken Alley. I say it's mysterious because it's said that when you go there, that when all of a sudden, when you look at the street sign, it will vanish right before your eyes. It's also here, it is said, no matter how many times you try or how many different cameras you use, you will not be able to take a photograph of this street sign. Unless, of course, you use mine and you'll catch it right away. But that's not the scary part. Many people will see bizarre lights moving down the road, following them, either coming directly toward them or approaching from behind. But many unsuspecting motorists will be driving down the road when all of a sudden they see what appears to be phantom chickens running out in the middle of the road. Well, at first glance, they think they might be real chickens. So they brace for impact, slow down, come to a screeching halt, only to find the chickens are not there. No damage to the vehicle, no roadkill whatsoever. Others have seen these chickens dart out and then vanish right into thin air. They are left leaving thinking that they've seen phantom chickens of Chicken Alley. The story gets even better than this because there's also a dare here. Over the decades, people have dared one another to go out into the crossroads of Chicken Alley and French Road. Now, any student of folklore will recognize the significance of a crossroads. It is said that if you ever wanted to sell your soul to the devil, the deed would have to be done at a crossroads. That's where the bargain should be completed. So it only makes sense that the dare involves going out to the crossroads, where it is said that if you stand in the middle of the crossroads, you will hear the angry voice of a male ghost or spirit yelling at you to get out of the road, get out of the road. If you do not heed his advice, it is said that you'll be cursed with bad luck until the day you die. But maybe that's not quite the macabre sense of adventure you like. Maybe you want something even scarier than that. For that, I recommend you head to the small town of Marydean. Right outside of my hometown of Eau Claire is a small little island that used to be the entire town, named after a young girl by the name of Marydean, who drowned coming up on a steamboat and was said to have been buried in an unmarked grave on the island. At one time, an entire town lived out on the island. They had a post office, businesses. The only way to get there and back was by ferry. Now, many believe the spirit of Mary Dean haunts the river like a siren. Witnesses who have seen her claim that she'll say things like, "Help me, save me, I can't swim, I'm drowning, don't leave me." Legend is, if you're foolish enough to go in after her, she will pull you under and you'll meet your watery grave and spend eternity in the river with the water siren Mary Dean. Now, unfortunately, I've talked to many people who have lost loved ones from drowning right in this spot. They tell me that the people go out there not knowing why they're going there. They're drawn there for some unknown reason, and eventually it takes their life. Now, as you can see here, I've been out to the, I'll just spread this here. I've done the dare. I've gone out to the middle of the river. Give it a minute to play here. I was waiting for her to pull me under, and as you probably guessed, I did survive, made my way back in. But the best part is you can camp out on the island if you want. You don't need to register, you don't need to pay. You can simply just go there and camp for yourself. But if you do, make sure you watch out, because here at the boat landing, it is said that if you pull your car in, when you turn it off and get out, not only will you see the ghost of Mary Dean, you might encounter the Hellhounds of Mary Dean as well. Large black dogs with glowing red or green eyes. Hellhounds have been reported throughout history in many cultures on the planet. Many believe they do the devil's bidding, that they are an omen of death. In fact, after one program I did, a gentleman came up to me, a big burly biker guy. You know, the type of guy you wouldn't think would get spooked by anything. Told me him and his buddies took their motorcycles out to see the ghost of Mary Dean. They had never heard of hellhounds, but as soon as they got there, they were surrounded by them. When I asked him why he thought they weren't just wild black dogs, he said three things stood out to them. One, these things were nearly transparent. They could almost see right through them. Two, they had glowing red eyes, not an eye shine, not a reflection. He said it was like an ember of hell emanating from the creature itself. And three, no matter how fast they went on their motorcycles, they said these things kept up with them. It wasn't until he went to kick it and his big biker boot went right through it that he finally said they disappeared. These people did not stop driving until they hit the safety of Chippewa Falls. But with Halloween fast approaching, many people like to go to a place where a lot of weird things happen in a small area. Again, if that's the way you like to travel, I recommend heading to Whitewater. There are so many legends in Whitewater, they have dubbed the place Second Salem. Even their local brew pub is named Second Salem. Many of their drinks are based on local legends. And the main legend tells of a witch or several witches cursing Whitewater. This is not your typical Hollywood version of a witch, because in Hollywood, every witch is a supermodel running around. These witches were thought to be practicing the witchcraft, the dark arts. So the community already had the Morris Pratt Institute there, which was looking at psychic phenomena, ESP, telepathy, spiritualism, and the like. So it was said that this witch was killed in order to stop her from bringing evil to their community, and that she now haunts the three cursed cemeteries that surround the old witch's tower. the water tower where the witch is said to reside. On any given night, you can see UW Whitewater students hanging out around the water tower, waiting for the witch to arrive. In some versions of the legend, the witch is Mary Worth, and she's thought to be the origin of the Bloody Mary dare, of saying Bloody Mary 3 times into your mirror. So the best part of this story is that it said that if anything happens to the graveyards that surround the water tower, or anything happens to the water tower itself, it will release the vengeful spirit of this witch, and she'll come back looking for revenge on the townsfolk of Whitewater. But here's the best part. As of today, they want to tear down this water tower. They're debating it right now because it's too expensive to maintain. So you might want to get there before they tear it down, or press your luck and wait until they tear it down and see if they release the witch or her spirit. As you saw in the beginning, I mentioned that I did spend time over in Transylvania looking for vampire legends. Little did I know, if I wanted to see vampires, I should have stayed in Wisconsin. Well, Mineral Point, that is. Starting in 1981, Mineral Point was overrun with vampire legends. It all began when this police officer on your right, Officer John Pepper, was patrolling late at night in Mineral Point. That's when he passed by the Graceland Cemetery. According to his report, he spotted a very tall, very pale, very thin, very ugly vampire, complete with a cape. He said the vampire easily flew over the fence and got away into the night air. He didn't want to make the report. He knew how it sounded, but he was on duty. He had to make the report. And as you can see, media from all over descended upon Mineral Point looking for that Mineral Point vampire. Now, I don't know if the police chief believed him, because as soon as the story broke in the first paragraph here, you can see that people were calling in from all over Mineral Point talking about vampires jumping out of every nook and cranny in Mineral Point. It got to be so much that the police chief told the newspaper that he was offering overtime for his officers to stake out the place, but none of them would bite on his offer. So maybe he was just having fun with the semantics. I don't know. But believe it or not, even to this day, I still get reports from people who believe vampires are hanging out in Mineral Point and the Graceland Cemetery. I've been there numerous times, both day and night, summer, winter. I've never been attacked by a vampire. Then again, I bring my vampire hunting kit with me just in case. But vampires are one thing. But thanks to my good friend and colleague, the late Linda Godfrey, Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It all began when Linda was working as a journalist in southeastern Wisconsin, a place called Bray Road near Elkhorn. She started receiving reports of people traveling down the road, oftentimes at night, but not always, when all of a sudden they saw on the side of the road, for a lack of a better term, what they described to be a werewolf. 5 to 8 feet tall, upright, biped sometimes loping about on all 4 limbs, the long muzzle, the fangs, the claws. Sometimes it was eating roadkill or freshly killed prey on the side of the road. Once Linda's books came out, I started receiving reports of these creatures from all over the US. And here's the good part, is that outside of charging at a couple vehicles, these creatures seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of them. And rather than attack and try to devour people, they seem much more likely to scurry back into the underbrush and try to remain undetected. So that means for you, when you go out to Bray Road or other places looking for these werewolves, most likely you're not going to die. Well, 50-50, still pretty good odds when you're out werewolf hunting in Wisconsin. Or maybe you want one of those roads where no one wants to go down it. One of these roads that seem to be cursed and people avoid it at all costs. If that's the way you like to travel, and if you're from the New London area, you would know this place as Marsh Road. And I love this story because this story is so bizarre. It seems like you could have watched it at a 1950s horror drive-in movie. It's so weird, and it involves Marsh Road, aptly named because it's surrounded by marshland on each side of the road. Hold on, we'll see if my computer gets me there. There we go. That's why they call it Marsh Road. Since the 1950s, people believe that this road is cursed and alive. It is said that if you drive down the road in one direction, it'll be a certain mileage. But when you drive back, it'll be a different mileage, as though the road has expanded or contracted. People have all sorts of mechanical issues on the road. Batteries will die, have to be jumped or towed out of the area. The main legend of Marsh Road dates back to the 1950s. And it is said that during October's Homecoming Week festival, the local high school celebration crowned their local high school royalty of homecoming, the king and queen. So when the party was over, this couple decided to go out to Marsh Road to celebrate. But they weren't going out there to get to know one another. They were going out there in a pact to end their lives, which is exactly what they were said to have done at the end of a rope. Now it is said that if you go out there, especially during October's homecoming month, you might see these phantom ropes hanging from the trees and vanishing before your eyes. Others see the ghostly images of the king and queen walking down the road as though they're zombies. But the story gets even more sinister because it is said that dating back to the same 1950s period is a monster that lives out there, a monster that science says does not exist. Again, skeptics say they can't exist, yet people on Marsh Road report staring right into the eyes of this thing. So what exactly are these people seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. This creature, the goat man of Marsh Road, half human, half goat, depends on which half is who you depends on who you speak with. In a more in a more gruesome version of this story, it wasn't the royalty did not die by their own hand, let's say that it was the goat man that devoured them. And when the police showed up, they realized the carnage. And rather than let panic ensue, they made up the story of the nooses and hangings. But here's the best part. Even if you don't believe in goat men, even if you don't believe in ghosts, when you're walking down the road at midnight by yourself and every little branch or twig is snapping in the woods, it will have your mind conjuring up images of that goat man. And you'll probably pick up your pace a little bit faster. But sometimes these things aren't scary. Sometimes they're just bizarre, like the Devil's Punch Bowl near Menominee, Wisconsin. For decades, people have seen weird balls of light similar to this artist's rendition floating through the area, changing in size, shape, and color. I spoke with a group of teenagers that were parked in the lot here, debating whether they should go into the punch bowl, when all of a sudden they saw a ball of light approach their vehicle. Then they told me this ball of light entered inside their car. So I asked them, I said, "What did you do when this ball of light entered your vehicle?" And these young kids looked at me as though I was crazy. They said, "We got out of the car. But if you do get out, make sure you go down to the punch bowl itself. People have seen apparitions. They've heard disembodied voices talking. They saw those lights. And it is said that if you take any water from the stream here, it will remain cold regardless of what you do to it. Keep it in your car all summer long, it'll still remain cold to the touch. But my favorite story came to me from a woman who was hiking with her son. They were about to leave. They were going up the steps here that lead to the parking lot when all of a sudden she decided to take one last look back at the beautiful waterfall. And that's when she noticed something was staring back at her, something like this thing. She said it was straight out of a folklore movie out of Hollywood, a gnome, a fairy, a troll, an elf, a goblin, the hidden people, the good ones. He said it was about 3 feet tall, pointed ears, pointed cap. Immediately, she grabbed her son and said, "Hey, do you see this thing?" By the time the sun spun around, the creature had run through the woods or just vanished into thin air. She didn't want to report it again. She knew it sounded weird, a gnome in Wisconsin, but she made the report to me, hoping that if others had a similar encounter, they would feel more comfortable coming forward. And she was right. About a month later, I heard the story from a UW Stout football player. He was taking his girlfriend down to the punch bowl to really scare her, to get her into the mood for Halloween. They made it about halfway down the steps here when they heard something rustling, some creature next to them, but they couldn't see anything. His plan worked, except it wasn't the young woman. It was the football player who ran back to the parking lot. I interviewed her and she told me she sat there for another 20 minutes or so, hoping that this thing would make another noise or maybe appear to her. But then she felt bad and had to go rescue her boyfriend. The last legend I'm going to share with you this afternoon is one you might not want to know about. It's certainly one you don't want to say its name, because many cultures believe that merely saying the name of this next thing is enough to put you on its radar. When you go looking for the weird will come looking for you. Of course, I'm speaking about the dreaded monster of the north, the Wendigo. Now, word of caution, I put this last because the Wendigo story can get a little bit spooky. It can get a little bit graphic, a little bit gory, and a little bit gruesome. So at any time during this program, the rest of it on the Wendigo, if you think to yourself, nope, this isn't really my cup of tea, feel free, turn off your computer, throw on a Hallmark Christmas movie, cleanse your palate. I will not be offended. Those of you willing to stick around, let's begin with the Wendigo. It began with the First Nations people of Canada, quickly spread throughout their country and into ours. They knew it by many different names and many different spellings. The Wendigo could show up in several forms. One, it could be flesh and blood, very tall, thin, skeletal, emaciated. Sometimes it's missing its own mouth and lips because it has an insatiable hunger for human flesh. And when no prey is involved, it will consume its own body to stay alive. Worse yet, it can show up in a spirit form and slowly possess you, turning you into a Wendigo as well. It is thought to be the elemental being of ice, of winter, that it walks in a straight line because nothing can stop it. Its heart is encased in ice, and there's nothing you can do when the Wendigo's hunger comes after you. We have dozens and dozens of stories of people killing one another because they believed that person was turning into a Wendigo, and that if they wouldn't have, that person would have infected the entire town, village, or tribe. But you're probably thinking this is nothing more than superstition from 400 years ago. You'd be surprised how many Wendigo stories there are in modern times, including just north of Spooner, Wisconsin, at the old Leisure Lake Summer Camp. A few years back for a TV show, I interviewed two brothers here that were staying at the camp all summer. Now, this is an old, rustic, historic camp. I don't know if parents send their children there for a punishment or for a reward. But the older brother was in the older cabin, kids' cabin here. They were looking downstairs playing board games and cards when they looked out the window and they noticed this thing walk by them. They immediately got the sense that it was there to harm them. So they notified the camp counselors who kind of took it seriously. But it's summer camp. You tell ghost stories by the fire. But the next night, without knowing the previous encounter, the younger brother was with his friend going back to their cabin to get warmer clothing when they saw this thing lurking next to the cabin in the woods. He told me he felt if he would have walked a step closer, this thing would have devoured him and his buddy. So they backtracked, told the counselors. Now the counselors took it seriously. They didn't know if they were dealing with a bear in the woods, a deranged lunatic, or something altogether different. But they instituted a policy that if you left outside, you'd have to have a partner with you, safety in teams. And even though it had been a couple years since they had their sighting before I interviewed them, they were still shaking when they told me their story. Their mother told me that they still have dreams in which the Wendigo, nightmares in which the Wendigo comes back to haunt them. But as I'm running low on time for this program, here's what I hope you take from the program you just watched. The overwhelming majority of people that contact me about encountering one of these things, they're not out actively looking for it. They're just going about their day-to-day lives. Like, I don't know, they just maybe finish watching a library program about mysterious creatures when all of a sudden they experience something they can't explain. So I want all of you to keep an eye out because you never know when you might be the next to experience one of these creatures. And with that, if you want more information, my website has more than you could ever want or need. But I really hope your adventure doesn't end here. Go to my website, grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Wisconsin. And when you do, I think you'll discover that we live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some weird people. And along the way, you might just discover that the strangest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll open it up if you have any questions, comments, or stories you'd like to share with me. Otherwise, you let me off the hook way too easy today. You can either throw it in the chat room if you'd like, or just unmute yourself. And keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg of strange places. You can't throw a rock in Wisconsin without hitting a place that is thought to have a paranormal reputation to it.
I have a couple of questions, Chad. The first is, do you have a favorite story or legend, or one that kind of speaks to you or scares you the most?
Yes, well, my favorite are the sea serpent legends. I just love the idea of swimming around and that there's something brushing up against your feet, something big, some undiscovered species, or maybe one that we thought was extinct but might not be. And for me, I think that's the scariest as well now that I think about it, because when I'm walking down Bray Road or Marsh Road, I really don't believe a goat man or werewolf's going to kill me. But I'm still scared. It's still creepy. But in my mind, I rationalize it as you're probably safe. But when you're in the water dangling about, I mean, there are large species of fish in there. There's all sorts of things. And of course, you can't see. So for me, that's really creepy. And that's my favorite thing to do is to start swimming through some of these areas that have a notorious lake monster or river monster in them. You know, so when you saw me do that dare of Mary Dean, I got to do that dare where, you know, I went out and she was like a siren, and that was pretty creepy. And I camped out on the island, and that was a lot of fun because, again, even if you don't believe in these things, your mind starts to play tricks with you.
Is there something that we can do as individuals to be more open to paranormal experiences?
One thing I've noticed over the last 30 years of researching this is that sometimes for many people, seeing equals believing. Makes sense. But for others, believing equals seeing. That if you go to a place expecting something to happen, I found that you're much more likely for it to happen than if you're not expecting it. And that could be one, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, that you're expecting, and any weird thing, a squirrel breaking a twig, has your mind wandering. But also, it could be that maybe by expecting it, you're opening yourself up to it, allowing yourself to experience it. So that's what I would say is go there expecting something weird to happen, and you might just succeed.
You told me beforehand that you live in Sun Prairie, which of course is, a stone's throw from Cottage Grove. Are you familiar or have you heard any stories about hauntings in Cottage Grove that we should know about?
I'm trying to think of Cottage Grove. I know there's a lot in this area from Razor Sharp screen printing in Sun Prairie. It's a screen printer and clothing company, but it's in an old funeral home, and they have all sorts of haunted stories there. Now, what I can tell you is nothing rings a bell right off of Cottage Grove. I know there's a couple, but it's just not ringing a bell. But what I can tell you is that once you get your library, your physical location, odds are it's going to be haunted, because I've traveled to over 500 different libraries in the Midwest, and the overwhelming majority of them have a haunted story attached to them. And it makes sense, because when you die, if you do become a ghost and you can hang out where you want, why wouldn't you want to hang out at a library? So much fun. So maybe that's why.
I'm guessing those are the friendly ghosts too, right? Hanging out in the library.
Yes. Usually they're just weird things, never anything menacing or sinister. It's always people see someone walking by and they'll look and it'll be closed, and they'll look and there's no one there, or the motion detectors will go off, or things will be moved around after hours. That kind of trickster type thing, where strange, but not spooky or scary by any means.
That'll be good for the kids then.
Yes, yes.
Does anybody else have any questions? You'd be welcome to unmute or throw it in the chat box. I guess I have one more, Chad, and then we'll close up shop here. If somebody does have a paranormal experience, what do you recommend they do with that? Contact you, contact the media? What do people typically do?
First thing I recommend is writing down everything you can at that moment. Your memory's the freshest. Oftentimes, your adrenaline is pumping. So once that's done, you might not have a great recollection of it, because for a lot of people, this is something that is outside of their daily activity. That I can't tell you how many people will contact me and say, now, I don't believe in UFOs, but this is what I saw. Or I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I have a weird story for you. So and write it down as quick as you can, get it out of your memory to paper. And then, yeah, look online and contact me or others that love collecting these stories. And you can do it without any follow up if you don't want anyone to follow through. You just want to tell your story. So, yes, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. And Anna has a question. She asks, my son wants to know if you have seen a UFO in Wisconsin.
Great question. The short answer is no. Now, I've been looking, but oftentimes with UFO sightings, by the time I get there, it's after the fact. Somebody will contact me talking about a bright light or maybe a craft, but often that's been hours before. So it's not like haunted areas where you show up and maybe something will happen, because it's always haunted, that these UFOs are fleeting, that oftentimes all you have left is the witness testimony. So I'm out there looking, but as of today, no, unfortunately.
Maybe Anna's son will be the next to see one.
Yes, that would be great. And there are so many databases online to report your UFO, from the National UFO Reporting Center to the Mutual UFO Network and many, many others.
And she said he would love that. Thank you for your time. Well, thank you, Chad, and thank you everybody who attended here live. Just a reminder, this recording will be available on the Village of Cottage Grove Library Board's YouTube channel. So you can look for that later today and maybe watch it tonight or tomorrow night with your friends or family. And watch the Wendigo part with caution, I suppose. And I'd also
Happy
like to
Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween. And just quickly also thank our sponsor today, Friends of the Cottage Grove Library. So hope to see everybody at a future program. Thank you, Chad. This was incredible. I really enjoyed it. Have a good day, everybody.